A white police officer humiliates a black woman but doesn't know she is a decorated military officer. Nia Roberts tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she navigated the busy streets of the city, the hum of the engine blending with the quiet thoughts in her mind. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt, and the vibrant colors of sunset painted the skyline in hues of orange and purple. After years of service and sacrifice, she was finally home, eager to reacquaint herself with the life she had left behind. Returning from military duty was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but the adjustment felt like a battle of its own. Nia had spent countless nights in foreign lands, navigating the complexities of war, and now she was faced with the challenge of fitting back into a world that felt both familiar and foreign. As she passed by the local diner, she spotted a group of familiar faces through the window, old friends she had grown up with, their laughter spilling out into the street. The temptation to stop and reconnect tugged at her heart, but she had places to be and a life to reclaim. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the evening air, jolting her from her reverie. Nia glanced in her rearview mirror, seeing flashing lights trailing closely behind her. A knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach as she pulled over to the side of the road, her heart racing. She had always kept a clean record. This was the last thing she needed on her first day back. As the officer approached her vehicle, Nia noticed the insignia on his uniform, and her stomach dropped. Officer Ryan Carter, a man notorious for his aggressive policing tactics, had gained a reputation that preceded him. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm, but the memories of past run-ins with law enforcement flooded her mind. "License and registration," Carter barked, his voice laced with authority as he leaned down to peer through the window. Nia felt her pulse quicken at his brusque demeanor. "Of course, officer," Nia replied, forcing a steady tone as she reached for her wallet. "I was just..." "Just what?" Carter interrupted, his eyes narrowing as he took a step back, arms crossed over his chest. "You think you can just drive however you please? You know you were speeding back there?" Nia felt the heat rise to her cheeks. "I wasn't speeding, officer. I was following the flow of traffic. I just got back from..." "From where? Vacationing?" Carter scoffed, his condescension palpable. "You think just because you're a woman in uniform you can get away with anything?" The anger bubbled inside her, but she swallowed it down. "I'm a military officer. I just returned from my deployment." "Yeah, and that gives you a free pass?" Carter shot back, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "You think that little badge means you're above the law? Just sit tight while I run your plates." Nia's heart raced as she watched him walk back to his patrol car. The last thing she wanted was to escalate the situation. She took a deep breath, focusing on the moment, hoping to maintain her composure. She had faced far more dangerous situations in combat than this, yet here she was, feeling small and powerless. The minutes felt like hours as she waited, anxiety gnawing at her. She could see Officer Carter speaking into his radio, his expression unreadable. She wondered if he had any idea who she truly was, what she had accomplished, the sacrifices she had made. But she knew that didn't matter in this moment. All that mattered was the badge and the authority he wielded. When Carter finally returned, he had a ticket book in hand. "You're lucky I'm only giving you a warning this time," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But next time, I won't be so lenient." Nia's hands shook as she took the ticket, feeling the weight of his words. "Thank you, officer," she replied, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. As she started the engine, Carter leaned down again, his face close to hers. "And by the way, don't think I'll forget this little encounter. I'll be keeping an eye on you. You military types think you're above the rest of us." Nia's heart sank. She had hoped for understanding, or at least a semblance of respect. But here she was, reduced to just another statistic, another person seen as a threat rather than a protector. She maneuvered back onto the road, her mind swirling with frustration. Why did it have to be this way? The drive home felt longer than it should have, the streets blurring together as her thoughts raced. She replayed the encounter in her head, each moment stinging like a fresh wound. Nia had fought for her country, and yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. It was a reminder of the struggles faced by so many in her community, how color and uniform often dictated respect, or the lack thereof. As she finally pulled into her driveway, Nia took a moment to breathe deeply, fighting to center herself. She stepped out of her car, shaking off the remnants of the encounter. The air was cool against her skin, and she could hear the distant sounds of children playing in the neighborhood. She wanted to feel joy, to celebrate her return, but the weight of Officer Carter's words loomed over her, casting a shadow on her spirit. "Mom, you're home!" her daughter Ava called out as she dashed out of the house, her pigtails bouncing with each step. The sight of her child brought a smile to Nia's face, momentarily chasing away the darkness. "Hey, baby!" Nia knelt down to embrace Ava, feeling the warmth of her daughter's hug wrap around her like a protective shield. "Did you bring me anything?" Ava asked, eyes wide with excitement. Nia chuckled softly, ruffling her daughter's hair. "I brought you a few surprises, but first, let's get inside. I want to hear all about your day." As they walked into the house, Nia couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. She wanted to be the strong, confident mother Ava deserved. But the encounter with Officer Carter had left her shaken. She knew she needed to find a way to move past it, to channel her energy into something positive. Later that evening, while Ava was tucked into bed, Nia sat on the edge of her daughter's room, staring out the window at the stars twinkling in the night sky. She thought about the challenges ahead, the struggles to reintegrate into a world that had changed while she was away, and the fight for respect and understanding that seemed to elude so many. Nia's phone buzzed beside her, pulling her from her Humiliates. It was a message from a friend and fellow veteran, Marcus. "Hey, how's it going? Let's catch up soon. We need to talk about what's been happening in the community." Nia's fingers hovered over the screen. She could feel the weight of the conversation they needed to have, the stories of discrimination, the struggles of returning veterans, and the ongoing battle for justice in their community. She knew it was important to engage in the fight, to be a voice for those who felt voiceless. After typing a quick reply, she took a deep breath and stood up, determination settling over her like a cloak. She was home, and while the road ahead seemed daunting, she would face it head-on. Nia Roberts was more than just a soldier. She was a warrior for her community, ready to make her mark, one battle at a time. The next morning, Nia woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She brewed a pot of coffee, letting the rich aroma fill the kitchen. As she sipped, she looked out the window, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood, casting a warm glow on the familiar streets. Today, she planned to visit the local community center, a place where she had volunteered during her teenage years. It was a hub for activities and support, and she felt it was the right time to reconnect. After dropping Ava off at school, Nia drove to the community center. The building was bustling with energy, children's laughter echoing in the hallways, and the familiar faces of community members greeted her as she stepped inside. She felt a sense of belonging wash over her, a stark contrast to the feeling of isolation she experienced the previous day. "Look who's back," called out Ms. Daniels, the center's director, her voice warm and welcoming. The older woman approached with arms outstretched for a hug. "Nia, it's so good to see you. We've missed you around here." Nia embraced Ms. Daniels, feeling the love emanate from her. "I've missed this place too. It feels great to be home. Come on, let's get you settled in. We've got some plans for the upcoming community fair, and we could really use your help," Ms. Daniels said, leading Nia into the main activity room. As they walked, Nia noticed a group of teenagers playing basketball in the gym and younger kids engaged in arts and crafts. The community center was alive, and Nia felt a spark of inspiration within her. She wanted to be part of this energy, to contribute to the positive change she had fought for. "Here's what we're thinking," Ms. Daniels said, gesturing to a cluttered table filled with flyers and planning materials. "We want to organize a series of workshops focusing on community awareness, issues like police relations, health, and education. It's vital that we empower our youth and give them a voice." Nia's heart raced. This was it, the opportunity to make a difference. "I'd love to help with that. I have some ideas from my time in the military on leadership and resilience that could be beneficial." "That's exactly what we need," Ms. Daniels beamed. "Let's brainstorm together." As they worked, Nia felt the tension from the previous day slowly dissipate. The interaction with Officer Ryan Carter still lingered in her mind, but now she was determined to channel that energy into something constructive. She shared her experiences, emphasizing the importance of understanding and communication, especially between law enforcement and the community. Hours passed in a blur of brainstorming and planning. Naya felt invigorated, surrounded by people who shared her vision for a better community. They discussed potential speakers, workshop formats, and how to engage the youth effectively. Each suggestion sparked more ideas, and Naya felt like she was finally finding her place again. As the meeting wrapped up, Ms. Daniels clapped her hands together. "All right, everyone. I'll send out a schedule for our next meeting. Naya, thank you for stepping up. It's great to have you back." Naya smiled, a wave of gratitude washing over her. "Thank you for welcoming me. I really needed this." After the meeting, Naya lingered, helping to tidy up the room and chatting with other volunteers. Among them was Marcus, her friend and fellow veteran. He approached, a serious expression on his face. "Naya, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "Of course," Nia replied, leading him to a quieter corner of the center. "What's on your mind?" "I heard about that incident with Officer Carter," Marcus said, his brow furrowed. "You shouldn't have to go through that. It's not right." Naya sighed, the weight of his words pressing on her. "It's frustrating. I thought things would be different when I came back. I just want to do good in my community, but it feels like I'm fighting an uphill battle." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I get it. A lot of us do. The community needs to hear our stories, what we faced, and how we can work together to change things." Naya considered his words. "You're right. Maybe that's part of what we can do with the workshops. We can create a space for dialogue, for people to share their experiences." "Exactly," Marcus said, a spark of enthusiasm in his eyes. "We need to empower each other. It's time to stand up and be heard, especially with what's happening in the world." Naya felt a fire ignite within her. "Let's make it happen. We can organize a forum, invite community leaders, and give a platform for people to share their stories." As they brainstormed ideas, Naya's mind raced with possibilities. This was the purpose she had been searching for. An opportunity to bridge gaps, foster understanding, and create a meaningful dialogue between the community and law enforcement. They could make a real impact. After their discussion, Naya headed home, the weight of her earlier frustrations lifting. She felt hopeful for the first time since her return. In her heart, she knew that her experiences in the military could help inspire change back home. That evening, as she prepared dinner for Ava, she found herself smiling at the thought of their upcoming workshops. She wanted to share this newfound determination with her daughter, to show her that fighting for what is right is a lifelong journey worth taking. "Mom, can we bake cookies tonight?" Ava called from the living room, her voice bright and cheerful. Naya chuckled, glancing at the clock. "Sure, let's do it after dinner. We can make your favorite chocolate chip cookies." Ava bounded into the kitchen, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Yay, can I help?" "Of course. You can be my little sous chef," Nia replied, ruffling her daughter's hair. As they baked together, flour dusted the countertops and laughter filled the air. Nia reveled in the simple joy of the moment, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. She was reminded of the importance of family, community, and the connections that made life rich and meaningful. After they finished baking, Naya and Ava sat at the kitchen table, indulging in warm cookies and cold milk. Naya watched her daughter's face light up with each bite, and she felt a sense of peace settle within her. "Mom, can we invite some of my friends over tomorrow?" Ava asked, her mouth full of cookie. "I want to share the cookies with them." "That sounds like a great idea," Naya replied, her spirit lifting. "We can have a little cookie party." As Ava chattered excitedly about her friends, Naya's mind drifted back to her plans for the community workshops. She envisioned a space where people could share their experiences openly and honestly, where they could come together to create a more inclusive and understanding community. That night, as Naya tucked Ava into bed, she whispered, "You know, baby, it's important to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. We can make a difference, one step at a time." Ava nodded sleepily, her eyes heavy with dreams. "I know, Mom. You're my hero." Naya smiled, brushing a hand over her daughter's cheek. "And you're mine." As she closed the door gently, Naya felt a renewed sense of determination. She was ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to stand up for herself, her community, and the values she held dear. The road might be difficult, but she was no stranger to adversity. With every workshop, every conversation, and every story shared, she would help pave the way for understanding and change. The following week, Naya Roberts felt a palpable sense of excitement as she prepared for the first community workshop. The local community center buzzed with energy, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the chatter of attendees filtering in. Naya had spent the past several days planning, gathering materials, and reaching out to local leaders to ensure that the workshop would be impactful. She felt a mix of nervousness and determination, knowing that this was her chance to make a real difference. As she set up the room, arranging chairs in a circle, she took a moment to reflect. Naya could still recall the sting of Officer Ryan Carter's insults, how they had left her feeling small and disrespected. But now, standing in front of a group of people eager to listen and engage, she felt empowered. She was ready to share her story and foster dialogue about the experiences they all faced. "Hey, Nia, ready for today?" Marcus called out as he entered the room, a welcoming smile on his face. He carried a stack of flyers and a few snacks he'd picked up from a local bakery. "Absolutely. I'm just about set up here," she replied, returning his smile. "Thanks for coming early to help." They worked together, arranging the snacks on a table and ensuring the materials were prepared. Naya had invited a diverse group: community members, law enforcement representatives, and local activists. She wanted to create a safe space for discussion where everyone could share their perspectives. As the clock ticked closer to the start time, more people trickled in. Naya greeted each one, her enthusiasm contagious. The room began to fill, and soon she could hardly believe how many people had decided to participate. The sight of familiar faces mingling with new ones filled her with hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of change. "All right, everyone, thank you for coming," Naya started, her voice steady as she stepped to the front of the room. "My name is Nia Roberts, and I'm honored to host this workshop today. We're here to talk about community, trust, and the relationship between law enforcement and our neighborhoods. I believe that by sharing our stories, we can foster understanding and create a safer environment for everyone." A few heads nodded in agreement, and she felt a swell of encouragement. "I want to emphasize that this is a safe space. We're here to listen and learn from each other. I encourage everyone to speak freely, but let's also be respectful of one another's experiences." Nia introduced Marcus, who took a moment to share his own experiences as a veteran and community member. He spoke passionately about the importance of dialogue and how they could work together to bridge gaps and build trust. The attendees listened intently, and when he finished, a round of applause echoed through the room. As the workshop progressed, Naya facilitated discussions, inviting attendees to share their stories and thoughts. She was amazed by the diversity of experiences that emerged. One woman recounted her struggles with police encounters, while a local businessman shared his perspective on community safety. Each voice added depth to the conversation, and Naya felt a sense of unity building among them. However, not all the conversations were easy. When a young man voiced his frustration about the treatment of black citizens by law enforcement, the tension in the room shifted. Nia sensed the discomfort, but she knew it was important to address these feelings head-on. "Thank you for sharing that perspective," Naya said, her tone calm yet firm. "It's vital that we acknowledge the pain and frustration many in our community feel. We need to confront these issues if we want to move forward." A police officer in attendance, Officer Linda Martinez, spoke up. "I understand where you're coming from. I want to assure you that not all officers are like that. Many of us are here to serve and protect, but we also recognize that we need to do better." Her words broke through some of the tension, and Nia could see the participants beginning to open up. "Let's discuss how we can work together to improve these relationships," Naya suggested, encouraging dialogue between community members and law enforcement. "What are some ways we can bridge the gap?" As the conversation continued, Naya facilitated a brainstorming session. Participants offered suggestions, from community outreach programs to joint training sessions between police and community members. The ideas flowed, each one building on the last. Naya felt invigorated, watching as the attendees transformed their frustration into action. Halfway through the workshop, the attendees took a break, and Naya stepped outside for some fresh air. She leaned against the building, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of the discussions settle on her shoulders. They were making progress, but she couldn't shake the feeling that challenges lay ahead. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Ava's school. "Dear parents, we regret to inform you that due to unforeseen circumstances, we must cancel the upcoming parent-teacher meeting. Naya frowned, her mind racing at the implications. Ava had been looking forward to that meeting, and Nia had hoped to connect with other parents about their concerns. With a sigh, she returned inside just as the break ended. The attendees were chatting in small groups, and Nia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She gathered everyone back together, ready to dive into the next segment. "All right, everyone, let's come back together," Naya called, her voice cutting through the chatter. "I hope you all had a chance to discuss some ideas. Now, I'd like to break into smaller groups to brainstorm action plans based on what we've talked about. Let's figure out how we can implement these ideas in our community." The room split into smaller circles, each group focusing on different aspects of the discussion: community policing, youth engagement, and building trust. Naya moved between the groups, listening intently, offering guidance where needed. She felt a surge of hope as the conversations flourished, ideas bouncing back and forth like a lively game of catch. In one group, a young woman suggested starting a mentorship program to connect youth with local law enforcement. "It's important for kids to see officers as role models, not just authority figures," she explained passionately. The others nodded in agreement, and Nia couldn't help but smile at the enthusiasm. Meanwhile, in another circle, an older gentleman shared his ideas on starting community events that featured both police and residents. "We need to humanize each other," he said. "Let's have a barbecue, a block party, something that brings us together in a positive way." Naya couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the group's creativity. They were taking ownership of their community and actively seeking solutions. But just as she was about to share her thoughts, the atmosphere shifted. The door swung open with a loud bang, and Officer Ryan Carter strode into the room. Naya's heart sank as she felt the tension ripple through the space. Some attendees exchanged uneasy glances, while others straightened up, sensing the shift in energy. "Is this the community meeting?" Carter asked, his voice loud and brash, completely unfazed by the atmosphere. Naya could feel her pulse quicken. She had hoped that their paths wouldn't cross so soon again. "Yes, Officer Carter, it is," Naya replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. "We're discussing ways to improve community relations." Carter's eyes scanned the room, his expression unreadable. "I hope you're not planning on bashing the police in here," he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "We're trying to do our jobs, and I don't need a bunch of complaints thrown in my face." Naya felt a wave of frustration wash over her. The workshop was meant to be a safe space, and Carter's presence threatened to derail the progress they had made. "Actually, Officer Carter, we're here to have an open dialogue," she said, her voice steady. "We want to discuss how we can work together to build trust and understanding." Carter scoffed, crossing his arms. "Trust? You think that's easy to achieve? You have to earn it, and the community hasn't exactly made it easy for us." The tension in the room thickened, and Naya could see some attendees visibly bristle at his words. She knew she had to take control of the situation before it unraveled. "I think we can all agree that there are challenges on both sides," she said, her heart racing. "But that's why we're here, to talk about those challenges and find common ground." As she spoke, Naya felt a surge of determination. She would not let Officer Carter's arrogance overshadow their efforts. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity as Officer Ryan Carter stood there, arms crossed and defiant. Naya took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to redirect the energy in the room and prevent the workshop from spiraling into chaos. "Officer Carter," she began, attempting to soften her tone, "we're not here to point fingers or place blame. We're here to listen to each other, to share our experiences, and to find solutions together. Can we take a moment to hear from some of the community members about their experiences?" Carter remained unmoved, but Naya could see the glimmer of curiosity in his eyes. "Fine," he muttered, still skeptical, but his posture relaxed slightly. Naya turned to the group, encouraging a woman named Sarah, who had previously shared her story about her son's encounters with law enforcement. "Sarah, would you like to share your thoughts with Officer Carter?" Sarah stood up, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I appreciate you being here, Officer Carter. My son is a good kid, but he's been treated like a criminal just because of the color of his skin. It breaks my heart to see him afraid. I want him to feel safe, not scared when he sees a police officer." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed her words. Naya could see Carter's expression shift slightly, the weight of her story hitting him in a way he hadn't expected. She pressed on, hoping to draw out more reactions. I know many of us have difficult stories, Nia continued, but it's important that we share them. Could anyone else speak about their experiences? Together, we can start to understand the fears and frustrations that exist in our community. A young man named Jamal raised his hand tentatively. I've been stopped multiple times for no reason. Each time I'm terrified. The last time they pulled me out of my car. I was just driving home from work. I felt so helpless. I don't even know what I did wrong. Nia watched Carter as he listened, his brow furrowing slightly. Jamal's honesty seemed to penetrate his defenses. I understand how that must feel, Carter finally said, his voice softer than before. But you have to understand that sometimes we see things that make us suspicious. It's not personal. We're just trying to keep the community safe. But what about our safety? Sarah interjected, her voice rising in frustration. We want to feel safe in our own neighborhoods too. When we see police lights, we shouldn't have to feel scared. Nia nodded, feeling the collective tension in the room. Exactly. It's about finding balance. How can we work together to ensure that everyone feels safe, regardless of their background? Carter shifted on his feet, visibly uncomfortable but still engaged. I get that, but there are times when we have to act quickly. Not every situation is black and white. Nia seized the moment. And that's why we need to communicate better. If you're responding to something suspicious, maybe you can find a way to approach the situation without escalating it. We need to find that middle ground. As the conversation continued, Nia felt a glimmer of hope. The participants were engaging in a real dialogue, one that could lead to understanding. Carter, while still defensive, seemed to be absorbing the perspectives being shared. Let's hear from some of the officers here, Nia suggested, glancing at Officer Linda Martinez, who had been quietly observing. Officer Martinez, what are your thoughts on what's been shared? Martinez nodded, appreciative of the opportunity. I think it's important for us as officers to recognize how our actions can impact communities. We need to build relationships, not just enforce laws. It's about trust, and that trust takes time to develop. Carter shifted awkwardly, but Nia could see the wheels turning in his mind. I agree with that, he finally said, albeit reluctantly, but trust goes both ways. We have to feel respected, too. Of course, Nia replied quickly. It's a two-way street, but how do we start that process? We need to create opportunities for interaction that aren't just about enforcement. Community events, open forums. Let's get to know each other outside of these tense situations. As the discussions continued, Nia felt a sense of momentum building. Participants began to suggest ideas for community events that could foster positive interactions, block parties, youth mentorship programs, and even joint training sessions for officers and community members. But just as the atmosphere began to shift toward optimism, someone from the back of the room spoke up. But what about the negative experiences? What if officers act inappropriately? How do we hold them accountable? The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Nia could feel the tension returning, and she glanced at Carter, who appeared defensive once again. That's a valid point, Nia said, keeping her voice steady. Accountability is crucial. Officers need to be held responsible for their actions, just as community members should be held accountable for theirs. Carter interjected, and we need to ensure that complaints are taken seriously. But there's also the issue of false accusations. Those can ruin careers. Nia recognized the challenge of balancing accountability with the protection of officers. Absolutely, there needs to be a fair process for both sides, but we can't ignore the systemic issues that exist. We have to address those honestly. As they delved deeper into the conversation, Nia noticed some participants becoming more animated, expressing their frustrations and fears. She realized that while they had made progress, the road to understanding would not be easy. As the workshop drew to a close, Nia felt a mix of satisfaction and concern. She had hoped for a breakthrough, and while there were moments of connection, the challenges they faced were still monumental. Thank you all for being here today, she said, trying to wrap up the session. This is just the beginning. We need to keep this dialogue going. Let's commit to working together to create a safer, more understanding community. As people began to gather their belongings, Nia sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Conversations swirled around her, people discussing the ideas they had shared, exchanging contact information, and committing to future meetings. Naya caught Marcus's eye, and he grinned, his smile wide. You did great, Nia. This was a tough crowd, but you handled it like a pro. Thanks, Marcus. I just hope we made some progress, Naya replied, her mind still racing. Progress takes time, he reminded her. You sparked something today, and that's what matters. We can't expect change overnight. As attendees filed out of the room, Naya approached Officer Carter, who was gathering his things. Officer Carter, she said, her voice steady, I appreciate you showing up today. It's important to have those conversations, even when they're uncomfortable. He looked up, meeting her gaze. I didn't expect to hear some of the things I did. I'll admit I came in here ready to defend myself, but I see your point about building trust. I'll think about it. Naya felt a flicker of hope at his admission. That's all I ask. Let's keep this dialogue open. We can't change everything in one day, but we can start to build a foundation. As they parted ways, Naya felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges that lay ahead, she knew she had taken the first step in fostering real change. The journey wouldn't be easy, but she was committed to the fight. As she left the community center, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the streets. Naya took a moment to breathe, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She was ready to continue the fight, not just for herself, but for her community and for the future generations that would follow. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity for Nia Roberts. The community workshop had ignited a spark in her, fueling her determination to create lasting change. She spent countless hours coordinating follow-up meetings, working with community leaders, and developing a framework for the next series of workshops. But as the initial excitement began to fade, Naya found herself grappling with the reality of the challenges ahead. Despite the positive feedback from the workshop, the lingering tension with Officer Ryan Carter haunted her. She had hoped that their brief moment of understanding would lead to meaningful dialogue. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how entrenched the issues of distrust and misunderstanding were on both sides. They had taken steps forward, but she knew that the journey would be fraught with obstacles. One afternoon, as Nia sat at her kitchen table reviewing her notes, her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Hey, let's meet up. I think we need to strategize for the next workshop. There's a lot to tackle. Naya quickly replied, Absolutely. How about the community center? I'm there now. Within minutes, Marcus arrived, a determined expression on his face as he settled into the chair across from her. I've been thinking about our last workshop. We need to address the deeper issues, not just the surface-level problems, he said, leaning forward. I agree, Naya replied, her brow furrowed in thought. We touched on accountability, but we need to delve into systemic issues. It's not just about individual encounters. It's about the culture within law enforcement and how it affects the community. Exactly, Marcus said, nodding. We need to invite more voices to the conversation. Local activists, youth leaders, maybe even some representatives from the police department who are willing to have an honest discussion. Naya's mind raced with possibilities. We could create smaller focus groups that address specific concerns. That way, everyone has a chance to speak about what's affecting them directly. It might help those who are hesitant to share in a larger group. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. That's a good idea. If we can create a more intimate setting, people might feel safer sharing their experiences. As they brainstormed ideas, Naya felt a sense of urgency. The issues they were discussing were not just abstract concepts. They were real and deeply personal. She thought about the stories shared during the workshop, the pain etched on the faces of those who had suffered from unjust treatment. They needed to take action quickly. Let's set a date for the next workshop and start promoting it, Naya said decisively. We can use social media, flyers, and reach out to community organizations. We need to get the word out. Agreed, Marcus replied, his eyes lighting up. We can also leverage the relationships we've built. If we can get some local businesses on board, they might help us spread the word. As they continued to strategize, Naya felt a rush of excitement. They were on the brink of something significant, and she was determined to see it through. But in the back of her mind, a nagging worry lingered. What if Officer Carter's presence at the next workshop stirred up more tension? What if he undermined the progress they were trying to make? Later that evening, after Marcus had left, Naya found herself lost in thought. She stared at the walls of her home, decorated with family photos and reminders of happier times. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. She wanted to protect her community, to ensure that her daughter, Ava, could grow up in an environment where she felt safe and valued. As the days turned into a week, Nia and Marcus worked diligently to prepare for the next workshop. They reached out to local leaders, activists, and even contacted a few representatives from the police department who had expressed interest in fostering better relations. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and Nia felt a sense of hope. However, one evening as Nia was finishing dinner with Ava, her phone rang. It was a news alert. An incident had occurred in their city involving a police officer and a young black man. The details were still emerging, but the initial reports indicated it had escalated into a confrontation. Nia's heart sank as she read the headline. "Mom, what's wrong?" Ava asked, sensing her mother's sudden tension. Nia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "It's just some news about the police. I'm sure it will be fine." But as she continued to read, her worst fears were confirmed. The incident had turned violent, and protests were breaking out in response to what many perceived as another case of police overreach. Nia felt a wave of nausea wash over her. They had worked so hard to build bridges, and now it seemed like everything was unraveling. "Mom, are you okay?" Ava pressed, her eyes wide with concern. Nia put her phone down, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. Just a little overwhelmed. Why don't you go finish your homework, okay?" As Ava left the room, Nia's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of situation they had hoped to avoid. She worried about how the community would react, how it would affect the upcoming workshop, and whether Officer Carter would show up again, this time under even more scrutiny. The next morning, Nia woke up to a flurry of notifications on her phone. Social media was ablaze with reactions to the incident, and the community was on edge. Nia knew they had to respond quickly. They couldn't let fear and anger take over the narrative. After dropping Ava off at school, Nia headed straight to the community center. She found Marcus already there, his expression grim as he scrolled through his phone. "Have you seen the news?" he asked, looking up at her. "Yes, it's bad. We have to address this at the workshop," Nia said, her voice laced with urgency. "We can't ignore it. People need a space to express their anger and frustration." Marcus nodded, his brow furrowed. "But we need to be careful. If tensions are already high, we don't want to escalate things further. We need to frame the conversation in a way that encourages healing rather than division." "I agree, but we also can't sugarcoat it," Nia replied, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. "People are hurting, and they deserve to have their voices heard. We need to provide a platform for that." As they discussed the best approach, Nia felt a mix of determination and dread. She had been so focused on building relationships and fostering understanding, but the reality of systemic issues loomed heavily over them. As the workshop day approached, Nia worked tirelessly to prepare. They created flyers that addressed the recent incident and emphasized the importance of open dialogue. She reached out to community leaders and activists, urging them to attend and speak about their experiences. On the day of the workshop, the atmosphere was electric. Nia arrived early, her heart racing as she set up the room. She could sense the tension in the air. People were anxious, and the recent news had left everyone on edge. As attendees began to filter in, Nia was struck by the diverse crowd. There were community members, activists, and even a few police officers, including Officer Linda Martinez, who had agreed to attend and facilitate discussions. But as she scanned the room, her heart sank when she spotted Officer Ryan Carter entering. His presence seemed to cast a shadow over the gathering, and Nia felt her stomach knot. Would he disrupt the progress they had made? Would his defensiveness overshadow the voices that needed to be heard? Nia steadied herself, reminding herself of their purpose. This was about creating a safe space for dialogue, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Thank you all for coming today." Katie, she began, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning inside her. "I know things have been tense in our community recently, and it's essential that we come together to talk about what's happening. This workshop is a space for all voices to be heard, especially those who feel marginalized. We need to address the pain and frustration that many are experiencing." As she spoke, she glanced at Carter, who stood with his arms crossed, observing intently. Nia felt a surge of determination. This was her moment to facilitate change. This is not just about police-community relations. It's about understanding, healing, and finding ways to move forward together, she continued, her voice unwavering. I encourage everyone to share their experiences, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. Naya opened the floor for discussion, and as voices began to rise, she felt a mixture of fear and hope. Would they be able to navigate the complexities of their community's pain, or would it descend into chaos? The room buzzed with nervous energy as community members began to share their stories. A young woman recounted a recent experience where she felt racially profiled by a store security guard. An older gentleman spoke of the fear he felt for his grandsons every time they left the house. Each story, layered with frustration and pain, added to the heavy atmosphere. Naya facilitated the discussion, carefully navigating the raw emotions, ensuring everyone felt heard. She noticed Officer Carter shifting uncomfortably, his jaw clenched tight. Officer Martinez, however, listened intently, occasionally offering words of empathy and understanding. As the discussion progressed, the focus shifted to the recent incident that had sparked the protests. The anger in the room was palpable. Several attendees questioned the police department's accountability and demanded justice for the victim. Naya struggled to maintain control, sensing the conversation teetering on the edge of chaos. We need to channel this anger into action, Naya interjected, raising her voice slightly to regain control. We can't let this incident divide us. We need to work together to find solutions. She proposed forming smaller groups to brainstorm concrete actions they could take to address police brutality and promote accountability. The room broke into smaller groups, the energy shifting from shared grief to focused determination. Naya circulated, listening in on the discussions. One group discussed organizing a peaceful protest outside the police station. Another focused on creating a community review board to oversee police conduct. A third group brainstormed ways to provide support for victims of police brutality and their families. As the groups worked, Naya noticed Officer Carter standing alone, observing the proceedings with a mixture of skepticism and unease. She approached him, hoping to engage him in the process. Officer Carter, Naya said calmly, I understand this is a difficult conversation, but I believe it's important for you to hear these perspectives. Carter's expression remained guarded. I'm here to listen, he replied curtly. I appreciate that, Naya responded. These are real concerns from members of our community. How can we, together, address these issues and rebuild trust? Carter hesitated, then sighed. I don't have all the answers, but I agree that something needs to change. He paused, then added, I just don't know where to start. Naya saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, a crack in his usual stoicism. We start by listening, she said gently, and by working together. She invited him to join one of the smaller groups, and to her surprise, he agreed. As the workshop drew to a close, a sense of cautious optimism filled the room. The shared experience of grief and frustration had forged a new sense of unity. Action plans were outlined, and commitments were made. Naya felt a surge of hope, believing that real change was possible. However, as people began to leave, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Shouts and angry voices filtered into the room. Nia's heart sank as she recognized Officer Carter's voice, raised in anger. She rushed towards the entrance, dreading what she would find. Naya pushed through the crowd gathered at the community center entrance, her heart pounding. She saw Officer Carter facing a young black man, their faces inches apart, Carter's finger jabbing the man's chest. Officer Martinez stood nearby, trying to de-escalate the situation, but Carter seemed oblivious to her efforts. You think you can just disrupt our meeting and get away with it? Carter yelled, his face red with anger. The young man, his eyes wide with fear, stood his ground. I just wanted to ask a question, he stammered. I have a right to be here. Naya stepped between them, facing Carter. Officer Carter, please calm down, she said firmly. What's going on here? Carter glared at her. This punk tried to start a fight. He's lucky I'm not arresting him. The young man, whom Naya now recognized as Jamal from the workshop, shook his head. I didn't do anything. I just wanted to know what the police are doing to address our concerns. Naya turned to Jamal. Jamal, I understand you're upset, but we need to handle this peacefully. Let's go back inside and discuss this calmly. Jamal hesitated, then nodded. Naya turned back to Carter, her gaze unwavering. Officer Carter, I suggest you take a step back and let Officer Martinez handle this. Carter's face hardened, but he finally relented, stepping away from Jamal with a muttered curse. Martinez approached Jamal, speaking to him in a calm, reassuring tone. Naya watched as they walked back into the community center, the tension slowly dissipating. Naya followed them inside, her mind reeling. Carter's outburst had threatened to undo all the progress they had made. She knew she had to address the situation head-on. Once everyone had settled back inside, Naya addressed the group. "What just happened outside is a perfect example of the challenges we face," she said, her voice steady. "We need to find ways to communicate without resorting to anger and aggression." She looked directly at Carter. "Officer Carter, your behavior was unacceptable. We need to create a space where everyone feels safe to express their concerns without fear of intimidation." Carter opened his mouth to retort, but Officer Martinez spoke first. "Naya is right," she said, looking at Carter. "We need to be better. We need to listen more and react less." Carter's face flushed, but he remained silent. Naya continued, outlining the next steps for the community action groups. She emphasized the importance of peaceful protest, community engagement, and holding law enforcement accountable. As the meeting concluded, Naya felt a sense of cautious optimism. Despite the challenges, the community had come together to address their concerns and work towards solutions. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was committed to the fight. Later that evening, Naya sat on her porch, watching the sunset. Ava sat beside her, drawing with chalk on the pavement. Naya reflected on the day's events, the anger, the frustration, but also the hope. She knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but she was determined to create a better future for her daughter and her community. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, protests, and community events. Nia worked tirelessly, advocating for change and holding both the community and law enforcement accountable. Slowly, she began to see a shift in the narrative. The lines of communication were opening, and a fragile sense of trust began to emerge. One evening, several weeks later, Naya received a call from Officer Martinez. "Naya, I wanted to let you know that Officer Carter has been transferred," Martinez said. "He's no longer working in our district." Nia was surprised. She hadn't expected such a swift response. "I appreciate you letting me know," she replied. "I also wanted to thank you," Martinez continued. "You've made a real difference in our community. You've helped us see things from a different perspective." Naya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The fight was far from over, but she knew they were moving in the right direction. As she hung up the phone, she looked at Ava, who was now drawing a picture of a police officer and a civilian holding hands. A smile spread across Nia's face. Perhaps one day her daughter would live in a world where such an image was not a dream, but a reality. You've made it to the end. If you enjoyed this story, I am confident that you'll love the next one appearing on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and please give this video a like. I'll see you in the next one.